Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. My name is Janet Ashford, and I am the Executive Director with College Sector Employment Service. Thank you for joining us today. Our webinar, How to Negotiate Your Salary If You're Offered That Job, is going to be facilitated by Joanna Laprice. And Joanna is with Cambrian College, and I welcome Joanna today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. To the right of your screen, you'll see a questions panel. Please feel free to write down any questions you may have for Joanna. My role is to help her with these questions as we go. There will be a break as we go along, so I will pose those questions to her at that time, and as well as at the end of the presentation. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to pass everything over to Joanna, where I'll be muted and on the line throughout. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the How to Negotiate Your Salary webinar. As Janet said, my name is Joanna, and I'm a Resource Center Specialist for Employment Options Cambrian College in Valcarran in Northern Ontario. Part of my job is to update the job board in my office with the latest job postings that I think our clients are looking for. And I would estimate that about half of them do not list a salary, and that means that the employer expects you to negotiate your salary. So it's a very important skill to have in job searching. It's often something that I think is not discussed enough, even though it's such a crucial part. We're going to talk about why it's so important to be able to negotiate your salary. Some of the fears that we might have related to that. When is the best time to negotiate your salary? We're going to talk about salary negotiation upon hire. So that means when you start a new job. We're also going to talk salary negotiation after hire. So once you've worked in the job, I'm going to share the strategies that are available to you, and we're going to break down each step, and we're going to go over that together. We're going to talk about giving your employer an ultimatum, and we're going to talk about what to do after salary negotiations are done, and then we're going to do a few questions and answers. I'm going to stop about halfway through for some questions, so feel free to type them out, and we'll get to it about halfway through the presentation. Now, I have to share a little bit of a story with you guys. So what inspired me to develop this webinar is a scenario that I recently witnessed. I have a friend who is starting a business, and I just happened to be with her when she was receiving a call from her accountant. And they were talking about hiring their staff and how many staff they're going to need and that sort of thing. And her accountant said that one of the positions she was hiring for was going to pay $15 an hour. However, they were going to budget to pay them $18 an hour in case the candidate negotiates. And I'm going to quote exactly what he said here. He said, quote, "If they do not negotiate, that is more money in your pocket," meaning her, the employer. So it's almost always expected that candidates will negotiate. Employers plan for this sort of thing. So if you are not negotiating, you could be potentially leaving money on the table. So we're going to start off with what is salary negotiation. So salary negotiations involve discussing a job offer with a prospective employer to negotiate a salary and benefits package that's in line with the market, and hopefully that meets or exceeds your needs. And we're also going to talk about how it should be matched up to your skill level, it should match up to your education level, and your knowledge and experience. And negotiations don't always just include salary compensation. It includes all aspects of compensation. So that means bonuses, stock options, benefits, perks, vacation time, and a bit more. So why is salary negotiation so important? So employers rarely make their best offer first. Employers almost always plan for the candidates to negotiate. So when we were talking about earlier, my scenario here, my friend who was starting a business and she was talking with her accountant, they were planning to pay someone $18 an hour. in the event that someone were to negotiate, but they're only going to list the salary at $15 an hour. So it's something to keep in mind that employers typically plan for this sort of thing. Candidates who negotiate generally earn more money than those who don't. And it's probably one of the easiest ways to increase your income. So negotiations can take anywhere from a few hours to a few days, maybe even a few weeks. But you think about the amount of money that the extra money you could be making in that amount of time. It might be worth that little bit of sacrifice, that a little bit of going out of your comfort zone, that a little bit of uncomfortable conversation can very much be worth your while. So we're going to go back to my scenario here, where my friend is hiring someone full-time for 40 hours a week at $15 an hour. So that means that that person gross will be making $600 a week. Now, if the candidate comes in and negotiates at the full $18 an hour, again for 40 hours a week, that means they will be making $720 gross. So keep in mind, I did not deduct any taxes or anything like that. So that means that there is a savings of $120 a week to the employer. And that might be like, some people might think, you know what, it's not worth it, $120 a week, it seems nice, but you know, it's on the grand scheme of things, I'm just not ready to have that conversation. However, when you're looking at the big picture, $120 a week over 52 weeks, so a whole year, is just over $6,000 of annual savings to the employer. So if you're with that employer for, let's say, 3 years, that's almost, well, it's over $18,000 in savings to the employer just for not negotiating. So try and keep that in mind when you are being offered something. Always keep in mind, could I ask for more? And the answer is probably almost always yes. So we're going to talk about a little bit of our fears and the myths around salary negotiation. So I think this is probably the biggest misconception when it comes to this is my offer will be rescinded if I attempt to negotiate my salary. And that's actually not true. We have to think that the hiring process is a very costly expense to the employers. It's often easier and more cost-effective to offer you more money rather than begin the hiring process all over again. So if you're the candidate that they want, they've offered you an offer of employment, and you rescind the offer, they have to go back and they have to perhaps begin the hiring process again. You have to think of the hiring manager's time, the time that it takes for HR to maybe look over the resumes, collect all of the applicant's information, all the time that was spent. It's very, very expensive for an employer to do all of that. And sometimes it's worth it for them to pay you a little bit more rather than to begin their search all over again. Another misconception is I will get fired if I attempt to negotiate my salary. Again, losing you as an employee could mean about a 6 to 9 month loss of your annual salary to the employer. Giving you an increase in salary is usually in the employer's best financial interest. So you have to think, if you go in and ask for a raise and you end up leaving your position, it can cost the employer about 6 to 9 months of your salary to replace you. So that means by the time that you give your notice, by the time, if the position is vacant for a little bit, if they find someone else, the training that goes into it, the time for the person to get good at their job to replace you, usually the employer takes a hit of about 6 to 9 months of your annual salary. So most of the time it's in the best interest of the employer to pay you a little bit more because they actually end up saving money. Salary negotiation makes me look greedy or ungrateful. And that couldn't be further from the truth. A well thought out negotiation makes you look like a stronger candidate. So candidates who attempt to negotiate their salary in a constructive way are perceived more as favorable than those who didn't negotiate at all because they were demonstrating skills the company wanted to hire them for. We're often thinking like in sales, like, you know, you need to be a good negotiator, that sort of thing. But even if you're not working in sales, even if you're working in a customer service job, you're often having to negotiate with clients, suppliers, other employers, your coworkers. You're constantly having to negotiate not just money, but all kinds of things. And companies really want someone that can speak professionally, that can, you know, represent them well, someone that can do some research, someone that can present things in a professional way. When you're negotiating your salary, you're demonstrating all of those skills without even realizing it. And so the employer can get to know you and what kind of person you are just by your salary negotiation. And if they see that you're confident, if they see that you are well prepared, you speak eloquently, you're presenting yourself very well, it might make you seem more attractive to that employer. So there's a few times that are best to negotiate your salary. Number one is being upon hire. So that's even before you begin your job is probably the best time. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. If you've already started the job after a positive performance review, so if you sit down with your employer and get a positive performance review, it might be a good time for you to negotiate. During a position change, so if you're changing jobs, it might be, again, a good time to negotiate. I also wrote this, an absence of a collective agreement. It is possible to negotiate when there is a collective agreement in your workplace. It depends on the terms of your collective agreement. It depends on a lot of things. It's something I chose not to go into for this time, just because each employer is so different and each collective agreement is so different. So it's always best to do your research and see if that's possible in your case. But it's typically easier to negotiate when there's no collective agreement. So like I said, negotiating upon hire is probably your best time to negotiate. You will not likely to be asked to assume more responsibilities for more money, so which can happen once you already occupy the role. You may be asked to take on more tasks, more responsibilities in exchange for more money, but that is not usually the case when you're negotiating right from the beginning. The employer is not yet aware of your weaknesses or the mistakes that you've made. You have not worked for this employer before. They do not know, there's nothing for them to go off of yet. So that's why it's a good time to negotiate upon hire. You're most likely to succeed in your salary negotiation at this stage. So just keep that in mind, that it might be a little bit awkward at first, but this is probably the time where you're most likely to succeed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why salary negotiation upon hire is so important. So we have two different scenarios here. If we look to the left, so without an initial salary negotiation, so this person here negotiated a $40,000 a year salary. So we see in year one, they made $40,000. And after a year, they got a great performance review and they managed to negotiate a 5% raise. So 5% on $40,000 is $2,000. So we see that in year two, they've managed to get bumped up from 40 to 42,000. And, you know, they're working hard. They managed to keep that raise, and they get to year four and they've made $166,000. And again, this is before deductions, before taxes, that sort of thing. Now, if we look to the right, this person here managed to negotiate a $45,000 a year salary. And so now once they get their 5% raise after a year, instead of it increasing by $2,000, it's increasing by $2,250, which may not seem like a lot, like it's only a $250 difference. However, when we add it up at the end, it's quite a difference. So at the end of 4 years, this person has made $186,000, and that's over 4 years. So that means that the person that did not negotiate initially missed out on almost $20,000. So the employer saved over $20,000 in 4 years by simply them not negotiating from the beginning. So the higher you negotiate from the beginning, the higher your increases will be, because those are often done in percentages. So it's important to try and negotiate as much as possible right from the beginning. So even though I said negotiating upon hire is probably your best bet, it doesn't mean that it's not impossible after hire. It's absolutely possible and can be revisited. It just may be a little bit more difficult. So some of the best times are after a positive performance review. And so you will have to do your research on your company, see when those should be done. Some of them are at 6 months, a year, depending on the company and their internal policies. But if it's not in the company's, if the company is not doing regular performance reviews, you can ask for one. You can say, hey, listen, you know, I've been here a year. I would like to know if I'm on the right track. I want to know, I would like to get a performance review on the year I've had so far. And that is a great way to get it started. After successfully completing a project, so if you worked on a project and that was successful, that would probably be also a good time to start negotiating. Probably what's most important is staying organized. So keeping track of your successes, your accomplishments, and if you've done any professional development training. So if you have participated in training, if you've participated in conferences and whatever is being offered to you by the employer, keep track of those things, because that will help you build a case in your salary negotiation. Another thing that's not often talked about but should definitely be used is talking to your network. Now, keep in mind, money is a very personal topic for a lot of people. Not everyone might be comfortable with disclosing their salary, but trying to ask for a range rather than a specific number may make people feel a little bit more at ease. Something you can say is, listen, I'm going in for a salary negotiation. I just want to make sure I'm on the right track here. Am I way off base by asking for this much? And the person can tell you yes or no, you're way off, it's way too low, it's way too high. And this is probably one of the best ways to know if you're in the right ballpark for your negotiation. Another thing you can do is ask your coworkers how they got to their salary level. So ask them, you know, how did you get to that pay figure? How can I get there? And they may tell you, listen, you need to go for this training. It might be in your best interest to get this designation. It might be in your best interest to complete this task or work on this project. And that'll help give you some leverage during your negotiations. And just asking what others have done is probably one of the best ways to get to that next level. So this is probably the most important part of your strategy, and it's research. So researching salaries and similar roles is your best tool for your salary negotiation. Now, there are a few websites that are available. There are definitely more if you're American, but these are the ones that I have found that work great for Canadians. The number one is JobBank. And we're going to talk a little bit more about JobBank in my next few slides, but that is some of the best data that you can rely on. There's also a website called Glassdoor, and this is where people enter information themselves. Just keep in mind that oftentimes you will be asked to create an account with Glassdoor or provide an email address, so just keep that in mind. And Indeed also has a salary section on their website as well, and it's very similar to JobBank, and they kind of have an average of what salary should be for specific positions and that sort of thing. So researching your job is probably the best way to know exactly where you should be in terms of salary. Figures may vary depending on your geographic location. So someone in Northern Ontario and Southern Ontario, the salaries might be a little bit different just because the cost of living is a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. Industry. So you could have someone who is working the same job, but in different industries, they are going to get paid much different. And other variables. However, it will give you an idea of what to expect. Reaching out to people in your network. So trying to reach out to people who already work in that field, people you may know, is again a really great place to start, and they can kind of help you, kind of similar to what we were talking before, talking to your coworkers, and asking for that information is very, very valuable. Another great tip is researching the skill set of staff who already do the job you want on LinkedIn. So something you can do is if you want a job and you can research people who already work for that company, and you can research what kind of training do they have. What kind, like, did they go to college? Did they go to trade school? What kind of things that they have that make them a valuable employee. And that'll help you, again, build your case for when you're negotiating your salary. You can say, hey, listen, I have this certificate, I have this training, I have this experience, I know this is what you're looking for. And it'll just kind of help give you a background on what other people at that company, what kind of background they have, and see how it measures up to yours. So I mentioned a little earlier we were going to talk about Job Bank. So I want to give everyone a screenshot here of what a typical job posting would look like. So I looked up the personal support worker job posting. And if you notice in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a job market information section. And so if we were to click on that median wage, right underneath where it says the $ per hour, this ultimately is what would come up. So we would have an idea of what a person in this position would make. So in Ontario, on the low end, someone as a PSW would make $14 an hour, which makes sense because that's what our minimum wage is at right now. We look on the high end, and a person can make up to $22 an hour. And the median is what's kind of in the middle, is $16 an hour. So this gives us an idea of what you should be negotiating for, because you never want to be too high, but you don't want to be too low. So we know that if you are expecting $25 an hour, it's probably not going to happen in this profession. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating. And this is also another really important part. And these are the employment requirements or prerequisites needed for the occupation. So again, this is for PSW. So in this role, someone would need probably a high school diploma is usually required. Home management experience may be required. College or other courses may be required. First aid certification may also be required, and completion of training program in the care of the elderly or persons with disabilities. So now what you can do is when you're looking at the pay scale, you can say, listen, when you're meeting with the employer, you can say, listen, I have a high school diploma, I have a lot of experience, I've been to college, I have my first aid, and I've completed all the training that's required. And this is why I think I deserve this wage. So again, comparing your skills to what is required for the role is very, very important. So we're at about the halfway mark. Are there any questions so far, Janet?
No, there are no questions. But I think one thing, I'm going to just throw something out because, would you change your thought process dependent on the economy? Like right now, employers are desperately looking for people, so I'm hearing, because we have a strong economy. So would you be more inclined to negotiate a salary with a strong economy or not?
That's actually a really good question, and you're absolutely right. Um, you want to plan it at the best time, and that's actually something I didn't write in there, but that is a good point. You don't want to be asking for more money when there are massive layoffs, when your department is not performing well, when sales are not good. You definitely, it doesn't mean it's impossible, of course, but you'd always want to plan it so that things are more favorable for you. You don't want to try and not plan it at a time where things are not going well in the company, or things are not going well in your department, or you're not performing at your best. It's up to you to make that call, but yeah, it might be a little bit more difficult for you at that time. So you kind of want to feel it out. You want to make sure, again, just making sure that that the odds are in your favor
Yeah,
is definitely something important to consider,
yeah.
for sure.
For me, I was looking at the economy in general. So I was basically thinking, like, right now, employers are finding it hard to find people. So
Hmm.
maybe their pool is not as good as they would like it. So,
Right.
so then maybe you're in a good position to negotiate. However,
That's right.
if the economy is such that, there's an abundance of people looking, like, I think you have to weigh it up too, thinking,
Absolutely.
you know, so there is a couple of questions that have come in. So I'll start with the first one, and I think you touched on this, particularly when it spoke about unionized environments, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. So, what about negotiating with the federal government? They are very rigid with the salary they offer.
Yeah. So, like I said, yeah, and those are environments that have sometimes not even one collective agreement. Sometimes there's a few different collective agreements. You definitely want to meet with your union representative and just see, talk about are the terms. Is it written out in your collective agreement that you can negotiate yes or no? Are the odds in your favor in terms of doing that? Typically, if you feel that you are working outside of your job description, you can ask for a pay scale reevaluation. It may take some time. It may take a lot of effort on your part, but the process is still very similar. You want to keep track of the things that you're doing. You want to keep track of the projects that you're working on. You want to talk about the skills you've developed. You want to talk about the professional development you went through. Process is very similar. You're going to want to work with your union on this one and see if it's a smart move. And I just hesitated to comment on the collective agreement just because each work environment is so different. But you can ask for a reevaluation of your position and see if it warrants a grievance or a change in salary.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question, and I think you touched on this as well when you talked about researching salary range grids for certain jobs. So the question is, how does competition factor into the negotiations? Employers ask for salary range during phone interviews. How do you make sure you're not outpricing yourself?
So we're going to talk about that again in a little bit. But you, again, making like this is where research is so important. For some jobs, I'm finding more and more when I'm applying for jobs with clients that a lot of companies are asking for a salary range even before you apply for the job. Like they ask for you, what are your salary expectations, right in the job application, and you can't apply unless you write a number there. It's always best to, if you are having to give out the first number, give out a number that is slightly more elevated because you can be expected to be negotiated down. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute.
Okay. And then, so the last question for this one go around is employers are finding it hard to find people in which sector? I think you'd touched on that. Are you aware of certain sectors where there's a shortage?
I'm noticing, so I'm in Northern Ontario, I'm in the Sudbury area. I'm noticing a lot of labor intensive jobs really need to be filled in this area. It depends on where you're at. So, that might not be the case in Toronto or somewhere like that, but I know in our area there is definitely a huge shortage of labor-intensive jobs. Like it seems like everyone is looking for a general laborer, everyone is looking for someone in construction. Those types of jobs are really in demand in my area right now. So again, keeping in mind what's going on. But we were talking about earlier, Janet, about what is going on in the economy. And even if the economy is not doing well, but your company is doing well, that can warrant a talk for a salary negotiation. I would really focus on what's going on in your company rather than what's going on in the job market as a whole, because it could be vastly different at your company rather than what's going on in the economy. Like the only example I can think of right now is when there was the big recession in the States like about 10 years ago, and people were losing their homes and the economy was like really not good, like things were not going well. But an industry that was thriving was the businesses that would go into homes and kind of empty out the homes and clean them out, and landscaping companies that would like mow the lawn for a house that was repossessed and that thing. Those businesses were booming because there was no shortage of houses that were not being repossessed, and so that company, like business, had never been better for them. And so even though the economy was not doing well, those businesses in particular were doing very, very well, and probably would warrant you having a talk with the employer saying, hey, listen, I know that you're busier than ever. I really want to stay here. And I think, I've been showing up on time. I've been taking on all these extra tasks. I've been working overtime. I've been a dedicated employee. I think, it would be a good time to talk about my salary. So judging not by the economy as a whole, but really what's going on in your company is probably what's most important.
Okay, good to know. And that's it for questions.
Pardon?
I said that's it for questions right now.
Okay. So based on your research and professional skills, you're going to want to determine a few different things. You're going to want to determine what's called your wish, and that's your highest salary expectation. Your want, which is your realistic salary expectation, and then your walk. And so that is your lowest salary expectation. So based on your research, based on your skills that you have, based on the experience, based on the education, that sort of thing, you are going to determine what are these ranges. And you're going to keep this in mind when you start your negotiation. So now, I did a lot of research about this, and there's a few different ways to go about this next part. There's a lot of studies that have been done as to who should say the first figure. Most people would say it's probably in your best interest to have the employer mention the first figure, and we'll go over that in a minute. But there are also some other like salary negotiation coaches and stuff who say you should communicate your salary expectation first. And I think what is really important is that you select the method that will make you feel the most confident. So if you're new to salary negotiation, pick the method that you think will make you feel most confident at the moment. Remember that the purpose of an interview is to sell yourself and to sell your skill set. So if you do not feel comfortable deflecting the employer and being trying to have them be the first one to give you a number, pick method B. Like just stick with something that will make you feel confident. You don't want to go in feeling unsure of yourself. You pick the method that will make you feel the most confident, and once you start building on that, then you can move on to method A. So just keep in mind that practice makes perfect. Your first salary negotiation will not likely be successful, and that's okay. So just keep in mind that you have to keep practicing. It's a skill, right? So it's something that you have to build on. And whichever way this goes, you can still get somewhere. So regardless of the method that you pick. So we're going to talk about method A, and that's having the employer mention the figure first. And this one probably has the most pros in the sense that you can be assured that you're negotiating in the right salary range. So with them throwing out the first number, you know for sure that you're in the right range. It can make it easier for you to make a counter offer at a higher wage. So if they mention a number first, you can go in a little bit higher. Cons is that this can be difficult to achieve without any practice or experience, so keep that in mind. It is easy to feel pressured by an employer to reveal your salary expectation first, and you must feel comfortable using deflection or stalling tactics. And I'm going to go over that in just a second. So oftentimes we're asked in an interview, what is your salary expectation? And this is a strategy used by the employer to try and get a salary range from you. And these are some of the stalling tactics that you can use, or deflection tactics. Answer one you can say is, I would rather discuss salary at a later time. I want to make sure this is the right fit for the both of us. Can you tell me more about the company culture? And that's, again, deflecting away from the salary talk and more talking about the company and showing that you're interested in the company rather than talking about money. Answer two is, if you have a budget in mind, how about we start there? So again, kind of relaying the question back to them and trying getting them to say a number first. Based on my experience in education, I know your company will provide me with a competitive offer. So just saying, you know, I trust that you will offer me the right salary expectation. I feel more comfortable discussing compensation once a formal offer has been put forward. Again, another very polite way of just saying, you know, I don't want to say the first number. Number 5, based on this conversation, this position is not what I thought it was. I will have to go back and do more research and consult with my peers. So this might be used a little bit later on in the conversation when you've asked more questions about the position. You know, maybe you didn't realize there was as much travel involved. Maybe you didn't realize that the position was so much more than what you were expecting. So it's a very reasonable thing to say, I have to go back and do more research. And then we have method B, and that's where you communicate your salary expectation first. And so a pro to this is that you determine the range in which negotiations begin. So you are setting the tone for where the negotiations start. This will allow you to negotiate closer to your wish salary expectation rather than your want salary expectation. Cons is that you can expect to be negotiated down from the first figure that you mentioned. So again, aiming a little bit higher because chances are the employer will then try to negotiate you down a little bit. You may not negotiate the highest wage possible. So this is where your research, again, is super important because an employer might have a number in mind and you might shoot a little bit too low and then they will pay you that salary. So just keeping in mind that research is really important, and I think this is a great method to start if you've never negotiated your salary before until you feel comfortable enough to do method A. But again, just making sure that you feel confident. Remember that it's about the interview, and this is just a part of the interview. So now, if the employer presents you with an offer, always thank the employer and express gratitude for each offer that is presented. You know, regardless if it's a bad one or a good one, you always want to make sure that you thank them. Take your time to consider your offer. 24 to 48 hours is not unreasonable. The offer will not be rescinded. You do not need to respond right away. Take the time to revisit all the things that you researched prior. It's okay to take the time to consider something. Again, revisit your wish, want, walk. Is it more in the walk range? Is it something you know, that you're willing to walk away from? And do not be afraid to provide a counter offer, having your reasoning and research prepared. You know, so you can counter offer, and you can counter offer more than once. It's okay. but just making sure that you say, you know, based on the market, the labor market right now, based on my experience, based on my education, based on my skill set, you know, I really do think that I want to be closer to this range. So there are things to definitely not say in salary negotiation. And so we're going to talk about those a little bit. So one thing that people are inclined to say is I have a lot of companies trying to recruit me. And that shows a lack of respect towards the employer who is interviewing you. You know, it shows that you don't really want to be there. Your mind is kind of elsewhere at another company, and you're only driven by the salary. So you want to avoid saying things like that. Saying something like, I have a lot of expenses. Something that's really important is leaving out personal finances. That has nothing to do with the employer. And it should just never, ever be discussed at any point. Keep it based on your skill set, keep it based on your experience, keep it based on the research you've done. Do not ever base it on anything personal. I was earning more money than this years ago. And again, this is a different position, a different company. It may even be a different industry or circumstance, and it should never be compared. I'm worth more than the amount that you offered me. Again, it's insulting to the employer. It's always, it is up to you to show your worth, and it's up to you to sell yourself. And you never want to make them feel like the amount they offered is a bad offer. If you can't improve the offer, you won't get me, and then you'll be stuck. Using any type of intimidation or uttering threats will never, ever work for you. I will tell you that the offer will be rescinded because it doesn't show that you're professional. It doesn't show that you can hold your composure. It shows the employer a lot when you start uttering threats or using intimidation. The ultimatum. So now this is a tactic that we should avoid using. So I'm going to explain a little bit what the ultimatum is. So you've been in a position for a while, and you go up to your employer and say, hey, listen, if you don't give me a raise, I'm out of here. And again, you should never negotiate when you're angry or upset. You should always negotiate based on facts and not emotions, as hard as that may be, because sometimes we might feel like we're backed into a corner a little bit, but it might be worth you taking some time to cool off if something happened, or it might be worth you just kind of waiting a little bit. You always want to make sure that you're in the right state of mind when you're negotiating. The ultimatum tactic should only be used as your last option. It should never, ever be your first option. If you choose to resort to this option, you should be comfortable with the idea that the employer may decide to part ways with you. So if you're like, you know what, I'm at my wit's end, this is kind of where we're at, fine. But you have to be comfortable that discussions may not go the way that you want them to. And again, this negotiation tactic probably poses the most risk to your job. So keep that in mind. I would not resort to this option. I would wait until you know, you're calm, you're prepared, you're ready. You do not want to negotiate when you're angry or upset. You may end up ruining that relationship with your employer. So the aftermath. So after you've accepted an offer, it is important to get that offer in writing that indicates the salary that was agreed upon. It's just reassurance for you, and it makes sure that you are getting paid the amount that was agreed upon. Refer back to your research and your wish, your want, and your walk. Did you end up in the ranges that you want? And if not, then you will have to consider that. And there's times in the economy where it's just not possible to negotiate, like Janet was mentioning earlier. And sometimes companies want to offer you more, but they can't afford to. So negotiating extras instead of a salary increase, like maybe extra vacation time, maybe retirement benefits, matching or health benefits might be a little bit more feasible for the employer. And again, it can be revisited later on in your employment. So questions, I talked about this a little bit. So what if my online application requires a salary expectation in order to apply? So research will be required even before you submit your application. So you're kind of doing some of the work even before the interview. Aim to put an amount that is slightly higher than your want, so something on the higher end of your salary expectation, and expect to be negotiated down during the interview. Make sure your application reflects all your experience and professional skills. So it's important to take your time, properly fill out your application, making sure you have a good cover letter, making sure that you're leaving a lot of description for the employer to go over. Because if you're just expecting a high salary, but you're not indicating why you should be paid that salary, will probably not sit well with the employer. So you want to make sure you're taking the time to properly fill out your application. You're showing your worth even before the interview. So it's unfortunate in this circumstance because you do not have the option of having the employer give you a figure rather than you do not have the option of the employer giving you a figure first. But it can still be done. And again, it's important to make sure you're taking the time to properly fill out those applications, that you're not in a rush to do so, and that you're putting in the work that is required in job searching. So are there any other questions?
I'm talking to myself. I muted myself.
Okay.
Sorry, Janet. So there was just one question, and I think you may have touched on it. So somebody asking about getting into the tactics of actually having the discussions around salary. Is there's a distinction made between positions that pay a salary and those that pay an hourly wage that's not much above minimum? So is it a different tactic around negotiating?
It really does depend on the employer. I'm assuming we're talking more like salary, like if someone is more at the senior level of the company rather than like in an entry level position. The methods are still the same, right? It is based again on your skill set. It is based on your experience. It is based on your education. So if you are working in an entry level job, but you're not participating in any of the training, you're not taking on some extra responsibilities. You're not showing an initiative to learn new things. It's not going to give you much to go off of in terms of salary negotiation. I have negotiated my salary once in a entry-level position. And so the employer basically asked me, they're like, well, why? And I had to go over and make a list of all the things that I had done. I had to work on all the projects I had done, all the things that I had accomplished, all the the things that I had done within the company. And it took a few months. It's not something that happened overnight, but ultimately I had to keep proving myself. And I did end up getting a raise. And I knew someone at the same company who would do it on a regular basis. And again, she would take on extra responsibilities. She would participate in training. She would make a case for herself every single time. And so it's important to keep note of that. And it's always possible. I think it's always possible no matter what position that you're in.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question here that this person had an interview one time, and the only thing that they want to discuss was salary, not their skills, and how do you handle this? Yeah.
So again, using the deflection or stalling tactics is probably the best way to get around that. You have to think, when you're in an interview, you're also interviewing the employer. If their interest is only salary based, maybe this is not the employer for you, right? If they're only interested in talking about money, they're not interested in getting to know you as a person, it might be an indication to you as to what type of employer this will be, right? Because a good employer will consider your skills. They'll consider what kind of person you are. Are you going to fit into the company culture? Those things are super, super important. And so if someone is only wanting to discuss salary, it might just be an indication that will you fit well into that company culture? It's something you're going to have to ask yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess
because it does happen. You know what I mean? Like, I work in employment, I do see it all the time. So it might be an indication to you.
Yeah, and the person did turn the job down, but it could go back to the fact that this employer is struggling, the business isn't doing well, so salary for them is huge. It's like, I want the best person, but I really can't pay them.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So another question, wouldn't annual, quarterly reviews, bonuses take care of pay increases per se? That has been my experience when looking for more money. Are you talking about over and above these things?
Again, depends on the employer, right? If an employer cannot afford you to give you a higher base salary, maybe try and negotiate a bonus structure or a commission structure. If you hit these targets, the company will have to pay you a bonus, or they'll have to pay you a commission on the things that you've brought into the company. And that's a great way to do it too, right? And it's an incentive for you to perform better, and it's also an incentive to the employer because you might be bringing in more business. So it's up to you and it's up to the employer, but that's a great way about going it as well. I knew someone who had done that. The employer just could not afford to pay them more. And so she's like, well, how about we implement a commission structure? So if I decide to sell this much product within the next year and I hit this target, can I get a portion of that, or can I get a bonus for that, or a commission? And it might be a good way for you to prove yourself to the employer, for you to increase productivity. And yeah, it's a great way about doing this. So whichever way you decide to do it, right? It's a discussion between you and the employer.
Mm-hmm. But I think what this person is asking for with regards to increases, quarterly reviews, annual, I think what the webinar today is really about the negotiation on the onset of getting the job. So, sure, bonuses and annual reviews certainly would need to come into play. But I think this is getting your foot in the door. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, and then one last question. My last job, it was not a question, it's just a comment. And on my last job, I was offered benefits on day one and paid parking. So that's kind of nice. That's another way of giving somebody an incentive rather than the paid parking. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you can. I've heard of people also negotiating a shorter probation period. Again, doesn't cost the employer anything, right? Sometimes, especially small businesses, they're just not in a position to pay you more. And so sometimes that can be negotiated in other ways, and that would be a great way to do that.
Yeah. Good. And that's it for questions. No others have come in. So, Joanna, that was great. Thank you very, very much for sharing that information. And in due course, it will be posted on our website. Visit other webinars that we have at www.employmentcses.ca. That's employmentcses.ca. They're free. Go on and listen to them if you wish. And I want to thank again Joanna for a great job. And
thank you. Thank you to everyone who participated.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, everybody. Oh, thank you. Just going to close this out.